And so, and then that's really important even in transgender spaces, right, in which we've had these conversations where if someone is transgender male, right, a transgender man, then they're representing the physical, wanting to represent the physical attributes of presentation of the masculine because they feel more either called in that energetic enough to represent form, but it doesn't change the physiology of having female anatomy and reproduction and those things. And in order to live more authentically embodied, there has to be the harmony and the acceptance of that. And
Mhm.
I've seen this happen, with a few different people where there's an inner conflict between feeling the more authentically embodied in the masculine representation, but then having to navigate female anatomy that has its own function. And so then being able to accept both will allow one to be more authentically embodied, more harmonized in self. That then allows more of which they feel called to live more accurately applied because there's greater acceptance of energy and not stifling through inner conflict.
All right. Welcome to the Negative Podcast. Today we have Kevin Walton. He's been a mentor of mine for many years and is an incredible teacher, somebody who embodies it fully and lives it, of what it means to be a creator of your own life and to integrate it and show up in your life with authenticity, honesty, and accountability, which I think are the basis of being a good human being. And there's a lot more there, and you'll hear from him today. So, welcome, Kevin. Thank you for being here.
It is an honor to be here, Elliot. Thank you for having me, brother. Very grateful. Very, very grateful. Ah,
So, I brought Kevin on today because I think it's time to have that conversation of what it means to be queer, be trans, and to integrate ourselves. It's something that I talk about a lot, and a lot of what I talk about stems from what I learned with Kevin and the importance of integrating our masculine and our feminine and living in that embodiment of that and our truth of ourselves while still honoring our sexuality and our identity and how we feel inside. So I'm curious what comes up for you in this moment when I say that, Kevin.
integration and the harmony of one's beingness is the first thing that comes alive. I speak to it a lot about the relationship of the masculine and feminine and what it represents. And when it gets offered as separate energies, and I used to way early on, I used to talk about like that, right? Like masculine energy, feminine energy, but and over the years, I got more precise, more masterful in how I deliver things and recognizing that masculine and feminine is the principle of how energy operates. So it's before we even get to some sort of physical form or anything, it is actually the relationship of how energy animates. And which means that it's very much a part of everything in creation. That relational dynamic of what we call the masculine and feminine principle is the necessary qualities and attributes of creative function, of reproduction, of exploration. And so the idea of it, as what I liken it to is it's the relational representation of what I call the alignment principle of command and surrender. And so the idea of us living our lives in being our fullest authentic expression of self means that we must be attuned to the optimal ratio of both inside of us and what that means to live it, right? To live more understanding of this, of just the energetics first, because then we can get to what the physical represents. And we'll obviously touch on that today also. Foundationally, the recognition that all of creation operates in the dance of this, that they're never separate, and the qualities that each represent, the attributes and the way of functioning they each represent, hold the harmony of creation itself. And all of us has it within us. So we're never without it, they're never separate, but they always function in whatever's the optimal ratio, both in our baseline and in the energetics of the moment. So it's never 0-100, right? No one's 100% masculine, 0 feminine, and no one's 100% feminine, 0 masculine. And it's never 50-50. It's always how much to how much supports this moment, how much to how much represents our foundation, how much to how much. And we're always being able to dance and weave. And it's so important to understand that on an energetic foundation, because it will help to paint a greater and clearer picture of how we actually function as humans. in understanding that. And then that breaks down how to go from then sex to gender to understanding why our bodies are built the way they are in relation to the masculine and the feminine, and then why relational dynamics play out the way they play out in relation to the masculine and feminine. And so that's immediately what comes up to me when you speak to it. It's like foundational principles to
Let's
understand
just
this
set the
first.
base.
Yeah,
Let's set the
exactly.
foundation right here. It's like we're all masculine and feminine. We're not 50-50, which I think is really important. And something, a little backstory, I was in Kevin's Lightings, the core. You had this program like before you started your CIT training, and we used to meet every Sunday. And there was one Sunday we were there, and I don't remember what I was like going through. I don't think I was fully on testosterone yet. I was still in my like discovery phase. And I was like, no, I think I kind of feel like 50-50. And then you just started like spitting this truth. And something that really stuck with me was basically like there's no such thing as non-binary. And I'd love if you can kind of talk a little bit on that because I think that's really crucial and something that I want to bring light to the queer community, that we're not, that we exist in the all of it. And I think when we can embrace our masculine and feminine and embrace that dance of the in between instead of just riding this invisible line of non-commitment.
Exactly.
uh,
That's so great.
yeah, what's your thoughts?
I love that. So first off, what's funny is you know how I teach in the practice that we don't live life in don'ts, right? We always live life in the actionable engagement of what we're doing. So if I'm not doing something, I'm obviously doing something else. And so then when I think of the idea of labeling oneself as a non, doesn't track because it doesn't acknowledge what is. And so, in recognizing why there's no such thing as non-binary is there's nobody that's exempt or can escape the relationship of the masculine and feminine principle. It's literally weaving through all of creation and every part of us. And when I have friends who have identified as non-binary, when they would have certain things happening in relationships and they didn't quite understand what was happening within the relational dynamics because of in their mind wanting to get past the concept of the masculine and feminine. And what I illustrated to them, and a couple were male, a couple were female. What I illustrated to them was, I go, well, you're naturally feminine led, or you're naturally masculine led, and so there's times where you're wanting to be in that, and your partner's in this, and you're recognizing the energy doesn't feel harmonious and flow. And if you both could accept the full capacity of the principle, you'd weave energetically far, far better. And then it was like, and then when the male who was masculine led, naturally masculine led, when he started going more into that, it was like you could see the light come on, the energy increase in him, and it was like, oh, and then I just reminded when you're feeling your emotions and processing or tuning into intuition, that's you and your feminine, right? Like these are, and then the masculine has its traits of being like assertiveness and our aggression and directionality, and the feminine is the precision and the right, and the gentle and the soft side is the feminine, the aggression and the assertiveness is the masculine, and devotion and fullness is feminine, and purpose and freedom is masculine, and understanding that they're not separate, so they're always wanting to weave together. And when I could illustrate that, you'd watch how they relate to each other in their relationships far greater because now they had an understanding of what was on at a given time and whether they were either in judgment of that, which was stifling their energetic flow before, or more accepting of it, which allowed them to be more embodied authentically. And the same was with a couple of the females where in the non-binary sense, I was like, well, you're looking to be more in your feminine in this relational dynamic. So you're actually want your partner to step more into masculine, but you're getting caught up in the idea of thinking there's no, right, the non-binary. And I go, but everything functions off of this relationship. There's no way to excuse yourself from it because it applies to every relational dynamic, whether it's male or female relationships, male or male relationships, female relationships, any form of transgender relationship or any form of queer relationship. Everyone in whatever container, someone's going to be their masculine, someone's going to be their feminine, and it's going to constantly maneuver. There's a base functioning to the container, and then there's the way that it dances. And so our ability to understand that there's no way to negate that in life, and if we actually embraced it, we actually would live more authentically embodied, because the key to authenticity is how much of my masculine to how much of my feminine represents me living my fullest authentic embodiment, and am I owned in them both enough to know when a situation calls from being more in my masculine or being more in my feminine, and do I weave with them effortlessly because I accept them both completely, right? And so getting once that was understood, it was fascinating to watch how well the relationships adjusted, because now there wasn't a judgment or a negation of what is a natural functioning. And so suddenly it was like, oh, I like this. It's cool watching my female friend go, oh, I like being in my feminine here, and him taking more of the masculine pole. And also, it's like, exactly. It's like we work so hard to negate things that are, if we understood them better, we would more energetically, and just life would flow more effortlessly. And so it's been a big thing to shift. And so to understand why there's no such thing as non-binary is to understand there is a fundamental relationship to life. It's also why there's no such thing as paradox, which we could go in that, but that's also why that's not a thing either. When someone says something is and is not, there's no such thing as that. That's a belief in duality consciousness, because we're thinking in terms of separation. But when we live in the unity consciousness, we recognize a paradox isn't a thing, it's all relationships. So if someone were to say, well, like in this, because this comes up in spiritual context a lot, right? I am something and I am nothing kind of thing, right? And the more that we let go of certain identities, we become more nothing is the concept in spirituality and like in Buddhism. But the truth is, the more you integrate the identities you once thought you were, you don't become more nothing. You actually become more of the thing that you truly are. Because the more we expand beyond identity, the more we live into the bigness and fullness of life, not the lesser of it.
It
And
sounds
so
like it's less judgment.
100%. Exactly. Because it's more accepting of things, and the more accepting, the fuller we live in access to literally everything.
Right.
Yeah. 100%.
What's coming up for me while you're speaking this, because I'm hearing you, I'm on the same page as you, and I'm right there. But I'm thinking of like who might be listening, and
Hmm.
especially in the queer community, I think the judgments that come up are less about like masculine and feminine energy, which is what you're talking about, and like man and female role. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. So the thing with roles is there are roles for what the principles represent. And whoever is going to be that in any relational container is going to represent more of those attributes and roles. The idea is, though, is because there's a narrative of someone just being masculine or just being feminine, there's this idea that both don't apply to everybody. Because I would always tell people in relational container, whoever's the feminine pole and whoever the masculine pole is, right? There are specific roles that come along with being that pole, even though at times it's going to switch, because life is life, live it. There's no way around it. Like even in a conversation, right? When you and I are talking, if I'm speaking, right, and I'm directing information towards you and offering you insight, I'm in my masculine. If you're listening and you're receiving, you're in your feminine, right? And then when you start speaking, then I'm in my feminine listening. There's no way around the interaction of it and everything. And the thing about physical reality, when there is such a thing as sex, and sex is the thing that there's no label can change. What represents sex is the attributes and the qualities in physical embodiment that represent the principle. So there's a reason why a female body has a vagina and ovaries and a womb, and why there's more fat for the body because of life that develops in it, right? That's a part of the feminine, or the feminine qualities represent that in energetic principle. And why a masculine has a penis and testicles and more testosterone and more strength, because of what the masculine principle represents. So the physical body is like the archetypical representation of those qualities. And that's why we're designed the way we're designed. So that's sex. And not to be confused with sexual intercourse, which if we stop shortening things, right, because we get lazy with language, we'd understand the difference between sex as a representational embodiment physically, and sexual intercourse, which is the interactive interchange and reciprocation of sex and connection. So in the understanding of this, and this also goes with sexual essence, like our sexual foundation, which is the sexual energies, the sexuality is the seed of the energetic power that we are. And so the more in touch we are to that, the more authentically embodied we are, because we're more harmonized in our energetics, and there's just no way around that. And so, and that's really important even in transgender spaces, right, in which we've had these conversations, where if someone is transgender male, right, a transgender man, then they're representing wanting to represent the physical attributes of presentation of the masculine, because they feel more either called in that energetic enough to represent form. But it doesn't change the physiology of having female anatomy and reproduction and those things. And in order to live more authentically embodied, there has to be the harmony and the acceptance of that. And I've seen this happen, with a few different people where there's an inner conflict between feeling the more authentically embodied in the masculine representation, but then having to navigate female anatomy that has its own function. And so then being able to accept both will allow one to be more authentically embodied, more harmonized in self. That then allows more of which they feel called to live more accurately applied because there's greater acceptance of energy and not stifling through inner conflict.
There comes a moment when you choose yourself over the fear. The Wings of Liberation amulet isn't just jewelry, it's your armor and a reminder that you were born to rise. The sky is yours. Claim it at nakedearth.art.
Let's dive more into that because I think that's really important and where like I have so many conversations with the trans people and like wanting to support them. And if I were to just say it very simply, accepting ourselves fully as we are, like I have a womb, I have a vagina, I used to have breasts, I took them off, I'm fucking happy. I'm happy as I am, and I don't want to change, my womb and my vagina and all that stuff. It's like because I see that gift and I accept the gifts and the magic and the power of the feminine that I have, like the intuition, the gentleness, the softness, the receiving, and like why I'm able to have those conversations with men, like in Sacred Sun space, where it's like where then, haven't been able to go where they feel safe with a male embodiment, but the female energy. So without me getting too lost, what would you say to somebody who is maybe in this transition? They're kind of in that middle space where, they're born one way, they want to be another physical embodiment, and they're having trouble accepting those
Yeah.
physical parts of themselves.
Yeah, 100%. And I appreciate you asking that because this is important for all the listeners. The thing to remember, and this is also important in both directions, right? Because there's someone who genuinely, like what you stated was so important. Your recognition of going through the change physically while still honoring the female anatomy that is still lives within you. Your change, you knew it was accurate to you because your energy increased and generated, right? You felt more liberated in beingness. And that's really important to understand when it comes to proper energetics across the board is does one feel more liberated and more embodied in themselves is a fundamental key. And I say that because I've also supported people who thought that the way to go was that they were trans and changed, but it turned out that was actually a narrative based on certain things about what they got more attention being in.
Mm,
And so it was like not the same. And I think that that's also part of the thing is we don't have enough understanding as a species to have a greater lens of understanding how to navigate it properly, especially at a younger age. And the dialogue around it isn't great. Like people don't know how to approach things properly or explore it properly to understand, is this true? Right? Or is it a narrative that's happening based on some energetic distortion? We have to be clear about both. And that's the same thing with even someone exploring their own sexuality of whether they feel like, well, am I gay or am I bi or am I, like straight? I don't know because I have this thing and hear that thing. And to understand the truth of what it actually is where the energy generates greater, more sustainable because you feel more in touch and connected to self. And so there's a lot of, and we can, man, this could be a long conversation. We weave that, but it's an important thing to note because if you can, in your case, and for anyone listening, if you feel like you're at that space where you're like, okay, I feel like I am this embodiment, but I'm in this form. So if I'm a male feeling like I am more authentically embodied to be in female body, or if I'm a female feeling more authentically embodied to be in masculine body, right? We have to be able to honor our body fully as it is, because there's also not a mistake of being born in the form you were. That was also an exploration. And like we talked about right early on, it's
mhm,
like you're exploring another framework of the human experience, my guy. Like, what are we, like this is what it is. This is a new creative exploration. But the things that will not be trifled with, if you will, there's no exceptions, is acceptance of the self. There's no way around it. And so for people to understand what it means to, okay, if I'm born in this physical form, right? And this sex, yet I'm feeling energetically called in this. What does it mean for me to understand this aspect of me and accept it enough that if I do go the route to transition, can I feel the fullness and embrace the fullness of myself through it? Because no matter what, no matter how people choose to label themselves, no matter what sex anyone is, no matter what someone's sexual orientation is, this whole game of life is still about, am I living in the full acceptance of all that I am? Which is why that's another reason why there's no binary. It's like there's no way to discount that.
Yeah, you
And
can't just
so,
tap out of life.
yeah, 100%. Like there's no, yes, just no. And so being able to understand oneself fully helps support it. And that's also, in my opinion, part of the issue of constantly seeking labels to create more either separation or more valid, distinguished state away from something else. It's everything like that is playing with the intellectualization of it. And that means it's all a form of chase. Like people are just chasing to figure out some kind of way to identify, which is the opposite of flow of creation, which is going from the inside out. Right? And that's like, am I actually getting more in touch with myself to speak on what I feel like I hold and represent? Or am I chasing ideas to place on myself, hoping it gives me some sense of self that I'm not feeling inside because I'm still not taking time to get more deeper connected to myself? And that's so fundamentally important because I could give a shit about whatever people want to call themselves. If you're not living in the greater acceptance of all that you are, you're still missing the point. And because there's no separation of masculine and feminine, there's no one that exists without it. And I'll say it again, no matter the form of relational container you're in, that energetic is going to weave through it. Someone's going to be in their masculine, someone's going to be in their feminine, and you're going to switch constantly because of different things, but there's going to be a base. And then there are fundamental roles to it, but it's about what feels most authentic to you. So it's not like, well, you're a woman, so you have to be in this role. If you're a woman that's naturally masculine led, then chances are you're going to be in a relational dynamic where you'll be in the masculine. And if you find, and say they're heterosexual, if you find a male partner who's naturally feminine led, you're going to weave in proper orientation. The issue in the journey of our lived experience are the judgments that develop by our conditioning that if I felt pain being in my masculine, I, out of avoidance of that pain, could start to condition myself to be in my feminine, which won't be me authentic. And then the same thing, if I'm naturally feminine led and I feel a lot of pain around that, I'll condition myself to be in my masculine. And so the issue is a lot of people don't even know which one they're naturally actually led with properly, which has created more of the distortion because if one is misaligned, they both are because they're not separate. And
Which
so,
is
and
why
then
it
there's
seems like they're perfect for each other because they're both.
100%, right? Exactly. It's like, oh, well, look at that attraction, right? So these are fundamental keys because there's an aligned form of the masculine and feminine and a misaligned form of it. And so if we can live more self-accepting, we're going to naturally be operating in the harmonized, aligned version, which means we'll show up in relationships like that, which means we'll choose more relationships that reflect that. And now we're just weaving in the evolution of our species. But these keys are so important because there's no way around it. And I think in the space of the queer community, it's either one of two things. Someone feels genuinely, authentically embodied in whichever form, right, whichever representation within the queer community that holds, or they don't, and they're chasing after something, hoping they'll get an answer from the outside. And we always have to be able to bring it back to proper functioning because the flow of creation is always from the inside out. So if we're chasing outside in, we're already in contradiction of truth and nature. And so like, you want to think about your journey, right? And we've had so many beautiful conversations and ways of accessing, but the key to you living more embodied, being more owned in the power you are, showing it more confidently came from the recognition of how to truly harmonize your inner landscape, right? And the beingness of you. And it's so fundamentally important. And there's just no exception to that. And the other thing we spoke to prior to the call is understanding the reference point. And I think that's the biggest thing. When we start getting messy outside, it means we're chasing our reference point outside. And that will always create a host of distortion and conflict.
Beyond just the gender.
Yeah, 100%. Because the reference point is the key to understanding how to maneuver properly, which is why in creatorhood I always talk about what it means to have your reference point as truth, right? Having reference point as a consistent thing that doesn't change. So even like having core values and principles to function in And so part of the reference point in creation is whatever represents the masculine and feminine principle, because it's literally in everything. Giving and receptive forces, right? Creative structure and creative potential. All these things are playing that out. And so the same as our physical form. So when I spoke about the male and female, they represent the qualities embodied in physiology, which means that's the reference point. Okay, so then if I'm in a male body and I am then owned in that in me, then I represent what we've given a term for as a male embodied masculine led, that I consider myself a man. A man would be the gender reference of the physiology of the sex in connection, right, to itself. And the woman, because I hear people say all the time, well, what's the definition of a man? What's the definition of a woman? And people are like, I don't eat it. It's like, y'all don't even know the definitions. And this is why we're so messy. We're not even clear, right, on that. And Ellie knows this. I'm very, like, every word in creatorhood is very specific. It has a very specific definition. So we all have clear reference. And so the reference point of understanding that helps us then make sense of. If you're identifying as a transgender man, even in own self of recognizing your physiology, but the fullness of your being, the reference point were the masculine attributes, right? And that's what testosterone's for. And so then there's, right, facial hair grows and, right, more muscle density can grow and like different things happen based on the adjustment because the reference point is that. And when we start thinking we can avoid a reference point or make up shit to drown it out because it brings up something for us, that just creates more inner conflict, and then that perpetuates more outer conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And then we end up having shitty conversations around it. And so being able to know that there is actually a reference point, and the reference point doesn't take away somebody's experience, it just gives us a better lens of how to operate properly, which is why understanding masculine and feminine is so important. Because if someone identifies as non-binary, they're not clear on the reference point, and it shows. It'll show up in relational dynamics. But if I'm clear on the reference point of being, okay, well, my physical form represents this sex, which represents these attributes. Cool. I feel more energetically led in this way. Cool. So then I weave like this, and then there's moments for me to turn on, because if I feel energetically led in my masculine, it doesn't mean I don't operate in my feminine. There's no way for me to exist like that. So I still have moments to bring on my feminine because it's an important aspect, right? So I like my aggression and get active, and I like my softer sides and being gentle, right? And that's us weaving with the energetic principle, knowing then how it's owned in my authentic embodiment, in your authentic embodiment, in everyone's. But when we lack a reference point, or we think we can make up shit to drown it out, or we think we can negate what makes us us across the board, all we're going to do is create more issues for ourselves internally and externally. And so the journey of this is really about understanding, how does the energetic principle work in my authentic embodiment?
Right.
That's the question that we come back to foundationally, because then we own it. And so, because I remember having some conversations, some people would say, I remember the first time I heard it, and they would say like cis man or cis woman. And I go, what's that? And they go, well, it's someone that's, and I forget how they described it. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. You mean just man and woman? Is that what you're talking about? And they were like, and it brought something up for them. And they're like, well, no, because that's not how we're naturally. I go, well, actually, yes, it is. That's the natural function first. That's the natural design
Mm-hmm.
first. As long it doesn't take away, and this is part of the society we've created, right? Where everything is, well, if it's not this, it must be against this, or if it's that, then it means that this isn't. And it's like my model's always, why are we not talking about both? It's all a relationship, right?
No,
Yeah.
I think that's super important. You talking about, like, I want to pause here because I hear this a lot, like, especially you talking about the cisgender man, cisgender woman, and you're saying, no, it's just man and woman. And I could see, because I have a very clear understanding of like the queer language, and I can tell how it could reveal a lot for people because they're saying, for example, say another trans person saying, well, no, I'm a man. And that's where I think a lot of the healing and acceptance gets to happen in trans people because, for example, I never say I am a man. I'm not, and I never will be. I am a trans man because because even just saying like I'm a man totally invalidates and crushes the experience and the wisdom that I have in my experience of understanding and fully diving into the energetics of both. And I think that's where, maybe we can get into this next, but like the medicine that we bring as queer and trans people is missing because we're fighting so hard to claim an identity.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully stated.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
it hurts and
Beautifully stated.
I feel sad for people that are trans that struggle to admit that and that feel so angered and upset when say like Republican Party is like you'll never be a man, you'll never be a woman. I don't fight that. I'm not like, yeah, I will. I've fought tooth and
Right.
nail to be this identity. Like, no, actually, I will never be a man and I am empowered by that. And I have acceptance of that. How do we get more people to come to that acceptance? Because it's not just
Yeah.
trans people. It's
100%.
it's men and women too, like you're saying that
Exactly.
how can they accept all of that without judging it and feeling like, say a man who loves to dress up in fun colors and whatever other thing that they might consider to be gay or too feminine,
Exactly.
they don't have to change their gender because they like pink. It's
Correct.
ridiculous.
100%. 100%. Right. And the rainbow's not monopolized. It's not, and the rainbow's not exclusive to the gay community, right? Like it's literally the colors of the spectrum. We can all wear colors. And I love you say this because this is actually really important. The part of it is the combativeness, right, of the dialogue that people then just feel like they have to fight, instead of own. And what you said is so important. Like, because then it gets ridiculous, and I hear that where someone's like, yeah, a man can get pregnant, and it's like, no, that's not how that works.
Trans
It's
men can get pregnant.
trans man can get pregnant. You know what I mean? Like it's like just be straight up with it. It's okay, right? It's and I love that what you're saying because it's just owning the nature of your embodiment. So if we know that masculine and feminine is the principle that then physiology represents in a lot of different ways, and then when it comes to gender, the reference point is man and woman, that being the reference point does not take away from the nature of someone's experience as a trans man or trans woman at all. It just means you're clear on the reference point, which allows you to actually understand more of you. Because if we understand the reference point, if you explore what the embodied reference point is, then we start to understand, okay, so if a man or a woman is the emphasized living focus of that ratio from the energetic sex of the attributes, now I understand, okay, so how does that show up in me? So I understand me more. If I am identifying as a trans man, then I have to understand the reference point of man and masculinity for that aspect of self. If I still keep the female anatomy, then I must understand the aspect of that as it relates to womanhood to understand the purpose and function of it. Sync that up. Now you're exploring what it means to be you as a trans man, which is a perfectly honored fucking identity. Like, and same thing with trans women. But keep it dedicated to the representation because that's how we have to be owned in ourselves and acceptance because that's how we then meet each other. But if someone feels like they want to fuck around with language, they're missing the point. And that's what it seems like the fight is. Everyone's just throwing around words and statements that sound ridiculous because we're not actually coming back to the truth of what's happening, which is, do I feel fully owned and accepted in self? And in so, is that reflected in how harmonious or not my relationships are? Because this is all about how we relate to each other and self, right? Like all relationships flow from source, self, others. And that represents the weaving of energetic interactivity. What is that like in me, right? What is that like in you? And if we're clear in ourselves, how are we relating to each other? And when someone feels like they have to create a fight to assure their existence, but they do it by playing around with language, A, they don't feel fully embodied in themselves first and foremost, which is why they're reaching for it outside. But then B, it actually then perpetuates the very thing they're actually wanting to experience different.
Tell me more about that.
For sure. So if I feel insignificant or inadequate or lonely or insert whatever feeling state right there, worthless, any of it, and I don't address that within to integrate that in me, from that energetic, I'm going to play out behavior as an act of avoiding that that's there. But the very behavior I'm going to play out is going to bring about more experiences that reflect more of that. So
Right.
like if I feel lonely and I just want to feel connection, I could get really clingy. But if I get really clingy, people are like, I don't want that energy around me. Then I just feel more lonely, right? Because I'm not actually sitting with loneliness and making peace with myself so I can show up in the world and not feel like I have to chase after someone to feel a hit of connection to tell me I exist, right? And so the same as when we play around with language. And so that's it's like the same thing that came up with like Black Lives Matter, right? So cops kill unarmed black people. And then black people are like, we also matter too. But then white people are like, everyone matters. Like, we understand that. But right now we're just talking about the fact that this person is just got shot for no fucking reason.
Yeah.
And so the same is with us. It's like, okay, so if I'm having a moment to share, this is my experience and I'm just owning myself, it's okay. But people take affront to it to be like, well, if you're saying that, that must mean you're saying that I'm not this or don't matter. And it brings up people's shit and we play it out inadvertently. If we were to have, because I remember watching this interview where a man was saying, okay, so if someone's naturally a woman, right? And the guy that was on it with him was a homosexual man. And he was like, no, that's not a natural thing. And this and that. And the guy was like, okay, well, I'm just wanting to understand. And I remember watching that going, it actually is a natural thing, but it brings up so much shit for this dude. He's willing to fight for the narrative and the lie and miss the point of actually why understanding that is so important for
Wait,
both.
that being homosexual is natural or isn't natural?
No, saying that what he was saying, the guy was stating if someone is naturally a woman. And the guy took offense to that and said it's not natural or unnatural kind of thing, meaning that, because what he was saying was, well, someone's a woman, that's the reference point. Because they were saying the thing about cis women and cis women, it's like, well, that's not, because again, the term cis was made up in the 90s because someone wanted more trans people to feel more inclusive, which tells you where it came from, right? It wasn't actually like, and so when we make up shit to make other people feel comfortable, we're missing the point of what's actually happening, but B, we don't give people a chance to actually meet things that's important for them to meet so they can be more self-accepting.
I understand what you're saying now. Yeah.
And so this guy was so adamant about like, that's not automatically the natural thing. And I go, well, it is. You just have to understand why. And just because it is doesn't negate this person, right? Because it's like the same thing with homosexuality, where there's gay men who are naturally feminine led, which is the usual stereotypical presentation of gay, right? And then there's gay men who are massively masculine led,
Yeah.
for all intents and purposes, are just men, right? Masculine led, doing their thing that you would think would be heterosexual, but they're gay because it's not automatic right that way, right? It's like the energetics are the key. And that's the natural function. Whatever I'm naturally led with will represent my greatest energetic state, greatest authentic embodiment, and therefore represent more of how I show up. And give you an example of this in the acting world. I use this example a lot because it's so profound how important this is. We were doing this weekend intensive, and there's a scene every time we do a weekend intensive. This really dope acting coach. They were doing this scene where like the guy was seducing this woman, right? That was the scene. It was really like kind of suave mode. Do you
I
remember
remember this story.
Yeah, right. And it's like, and he was, all of us could tell he was gay. It was simple. It was, but we didn't know that he wasn't out with it, like owned in it yet. So you can see him stifling through his scene. You can see it's like you don't feel connected to it. You can see he's not really connected to it. And as soon as they finish the scene, the acting coach, Tommy's so awesome. He would go, like he facilitates acting workshops, like how we facilitate creator things. Like he's down to push you to your fucking edge and do all this stuff. It's great. He immediately waits for a second because he always waits for a moment and asks how it is for everyone they're seeing. And he just like looks at the dude and goes, "You're gay, right?" And the guy just breaks down, right? Because he just breaks down crying because he's not out yet. And even though it wasn't hard to see. And so then he goes through a process, right there on stage, and he gets more in touch with himself. We're all celebrating him being owned in himself, now more liberated. Now that he's not working so hard to hide himself, he's now more connected to himself and his sexuality, does the scene again, fucking Broadway status, right? Like, because now he's actually connected to his sexuality. So because he's connected to his sexuality as a homosexual, he now plays the role of a heterosexual in the scene stellarly. So much so that the woman in the scene was like, man, I got flustered and I felt all this energy come up and I was like, what the fuck is happening? And it made the scene better, right? And like everything looked better because he was more connected to the truth of himself. It allowed him to then play the truth of the character. But when we're stifled in ourselves, we're not only are we not living authentic in our body, we don't show up in our lives.
And that's why it's so difficult for trans people to really fully live into the next step that they want to live in, because they don't accept where they're at. Because if your feminine is off, like, so is the masculine. How do you word it? You say, can you remind me how you say
if
it?
one's misaligned, they both are. If one's aligned, they both are.
Misaligned, yeah.
Percent.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for us to accept whatever our birth sex is, so that we can live into that. Like, I don't think I would have been able to do years and several events of Sacred Sons and show up like one of the dudes if I didn't accept my feminine
100%.
self
Exactly.
and
Because
feel comfortable with it.
Exactly. And that's the importance of like what it means. Like, and because you were more owning yourself and accepting, then you understood how to be you in that container, right? So it's like it's a men's organization, men's weekend, and you're a transgender man in it, understanding your place in it because you have a place in it. Right. And I love it because you and another one of our brothers, both, I supported him weaving his connection to himself too, because he was also trans man, still had his female anatomy, and he was struggling with the same thing. And once we dropped in and got more harmonized, it was like he sent me this really beautiful message. And someone was like, fuck, I love y'all. So fuck, okay. I'm not gonna tear up. It's also okay if I do. But it was beautiful, like witnessing him, and witnessing other brothers and sisters of mine, where watching everyone become more owned in themselves and celebrate their ownness rather than fight themselves because they think they're at odds, right? Like someone who's transgender, the biggest struggle I see is their narrative that they're at odds with themselves, right? That it's a battle. I'm in this body, but I feel like this, as if it's a war, and not, I'm in this body, I feel like this. How does that sync? How do I explore this, right? It's like an automatic battle, which is then what it feels like when we see it out in the world, where everyone's talking and wanting to talk over each other and just shout and like, no, I'm dumbfounded by it sometimes when I watch it and they're like, no, a man can get pregnant. You go, no, a trans man can get pregnant because you have female anatomy. It's just acknowledge that. Don't start playing with language that stifles the functioning mechanism of how life operates. Because if we understood it better, we'd all relate better, and we wouldn't feel like we have to talk over each other and convince each other of something just because we don't want to feel like we're being ostracized or belittled or discarded, or all the narratives we play out in our society when we don't know how to accept ourselves and honor somebody else's opinion or where they may currently be.
Because they're taking that language so personally.
100%.
So personally, if they say, if say I'm talking to you, you're saying I'm a man, you saying you're a man does not discredit me being a trans man
At all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's not
trans
more or
people
less
have existed. Yeah, trans people have existed for, hundreds of years, like as two
100%.
spirits. Like it's not something new either. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's maybe where the other side, has
Exactly.
difficulty accepting the transness, because I don't know, why do you think, the other side, how would I say, like men and women, who are having trouble accepting trans people and queer people, saying this is new, this is a fad. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think foundationally, it's the discomfort with misunderstanding or like a lack of understanding. Because that's the same thing that happened with the gay community, right? Like
Yeah,
early
yeah.
on, like gays, lesbians have existed since, like period, right? So but the reason why it's not a dominant portion is there's just a functional mechanism, but it's also a part of human experience. But when it got more prevalent or more socially present, it confronts people's ideas of what they thought and think life is and how it's supposed to be and where things belong. And I think that's the biggest struggle. And this isn't just relegated to trans or homosexual or queer community at all, right? It's the same thing that happened with colorism, right? It's like slaves were slaves, and so they wrote a document that said slaves are no longer slaves, but everyone who had convinced themselves that these people were beneath them were like, well, what does this mean? Because now if they're not my slave, how do I relate to this person? Because I've convinced myself they're beneath me. So now you're telling me I got to have them in my government and go eat with them at a thing and this and that. And I don't know how to be with that information because it brings up shit for me. So what do? I just start creating segregation and ways to make sure I can still have my life the way I find it to be comfortable for me. And maybe if I stick my hand in the sand or act like I don't see what's up, or maybe if I'm harsh enough, I can keep it that way. It's when things come up for people they don't know how to process, they redirect the energy somewhere else. And this was the same thing with trans community. It's when these things start become more present and socially present. If people don't understand what it means to be them in relation to it, they struggle with it. You know what I mean? Like, and so because we just create narratives around it. Like I have friends who I remember I have had friends who are gay, and some of my friends who aren't gay, who don't have a lot of friends who are gay, were like, so like, it's okay. Like, I mean, this is years ago, so it's not an issue as much anymore. But early on they were like, so you're cool being around them? They don't like look to hit on you and shit. And I was like, what? It's like, it's just because someone's gay, it means they automatically have to go after every man they see. Like, what are we talking about, right? Like, these are the things that we come up with in our mind. And I think these are the things that we have to navigate. But I think that's also then what comes up in this transgender community, because I see it happen in both directions, like where, just like we're stating now, like if I say I'm a man and I own it and it feels powerful to me, and you say I'm a trans man and you own it and it feels powerful to you, cool, we're here relating to each other. But because things come up for us, people start using it as a way to want to make it seem like I'm more important than you, or more real than you, or more, whatever the narrative, insert whatever the narrative is, that then perpetuates our struggle. And so it's because, like, I was talking about this, there is no us. I mean, there is no them, there's only us, right? We're all a part of civilization. And we want to understand what it means to be us in this civilization. In order to do that, we have to understand what this civilization represents, what are the reference points, and what are the different facets that comprise it. When we think it's only supposed to be a certain way, or this is the reference point, so this must be the norm, and anything that is different than the reference point, which is not true. It just means the reference point shows everything how to navigate within itself properly. If also heterosexual men and women understood the reference point properly, they wouldn't have an issue with people being gay or lesbian or trans or queer, because they'd understand the mechanics at work within someone representing that. And that's also part of the issue. It's not even just trans and queer community not fully understanding and grasp. It's also masculine and feminine, or men and women also don't fully grasp it sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, I just watch this across the board, which is why I teach this all the time, because everyone could just use more awareness of how it works, and it would dissolve the conflict and a lot of the unnecessary discussions we have around it. And it would actually get us to explore things differently. So like, when it talks about the bathrooms, or someone going to use a bathroom, or an athlete that was a male athlete in a men's sport, transitioned to female, and then goes into women's sports and dominates it physically because they still represent the physiology. If we understood those mechanics, we'd have to understand how to actually approach this. And it's not a click overnight thing. You are now having to explore the nature of sporting infrastructure. You know what I mean? And I think one of the other things that brought up a lot for men and women themselves who have their own prejudices with either homosexuality or transgender or queer, I think the biggest issue was also how it was getting shoved in people's faces as if they don't have their own feelings around it, right? It's like everyone wants to consider, like, I want to be called this. Okay, cool. You want to be called that. I could choose to acknowledge that and do that, but I also don't have to. And if you get mad at me because I don't agree, the idea is that we have a conversation around it
Right.
and not a battle around it.
Right.
Because now it's like when someone says, "Well, no, this is the way it is," and someone says, "Well, this is the way it is." It's like, well, so cool. Both of you are lacking consideration, right? There's the foundational function of how things are, and then there's how we're weaving through it. And if we understood more understanding, it's like I say, if I see a woman and say she identifies as actually no, this came up for where I was saying this woman over here, she something something, and this woman said, "I don't identify with that." And I said, "Okay." And she was like, and I take offense to that. And I go, "Well, why? If I'm seeing you and the way I'm perceiving you as she, then I'm going to say that. If you feel differently, now it's a conversation, but you automatically being offended because I'm not running around here automatically being like, wait, who are you? What do you think?" It's like it's more of the reflection of the narratives and pain points in people, not, oh, here's an opportunity for discussion. Because then I also have friends who consider them non-binary, and we had a conversation around it. And sometimes I was she, and they're like, it's fine. This is what I choose to do. I don't give a fuck what you call me. It's like that's an owned human.
Right. Because then it gets kind of awkward too when somebody, say looks at me and starts calling me she and her, and then they look kind of like you look kind of dumb. It's the
Exactly.
acknowledgement of like where
Yeah.
you're at, because 10 years ago, when I had no facial hair and when I had breasts and when I had a higher voice, if somebody called me she, I didn't get as mad
For sure.
because
Like, okay,
yeah,
that tracks.
like I look and there's that acknowledgement, I think what you're saying, like on
100%.
our side, in this community, that acknowledgement that a lot of people don't even know how to integrate it, like you're saying, because we have to look at the whole system. And some people don't even want to, add in an extra step in their morning routine to bring them more health, let alone completely change the way that they're existing.
For real. People still go to work at the cost of their health, right? Like, it's like, this is the world we're living in. You know what I mean? Like, people still have to put health as a priority in their lives, and we're then navigating this. And I love you stated that because it's that real. And that's really the biggest struggle is we as a species, collectively, we aren't clear on reference points. We aren't fundamentally clear on a lot. We're super sloppy with language and our definitions of it. Things are super murky and not clear. And we're not that even clear and embodied in ourselves across the board. And then it just shows up in whatever the fucking focal point is for the day as to that reflects how we're not in touch with self. And
Right. This conversation about transness and queerness is actually a plot
yeah,
twist just
it's just,
about the entire
yeah,
collective of the human race.
this is one focal point of a greater issue at work. It just is also there, right? And so if we can understand the reference points that why these things, because I always tell people that too, like any ism is a side effect, not a cause, right? Like sexism, colorism, classism, those are all side effects of consciousness issues and emotional issues that aren't addressed. And then we just play it out with each other. And so we're on the journey of having greater understanding of what it means to be a human being, what it means to like how to properly understand masculine and feminine and what it is and how it works, and then how it shows up in our lives all the time. And then our understanding of whether we're fully embracing of it to then know how it moves, because my understanding of masculine and feminine helps me function as my embodiment. Your understanding of masculine and feminine helps you function in your embodiment. And here we are relating to each other properly because we accept ourselves and honor each other and accept each other. It's like simple, right? Because
Yeah.
but it's the lack of that perpetuates the conflict, because the conflict externally is a reflection of the inner conflict made manifest.
And that's
You
why
know,
it starts with you.
100% every time. Every time.
Full circle.
It feels like,
Plot
here
twist.
we
None of this matters.
are. It's so real. It's so real. Yeah, man.
Yeah. Cool. All right. This is amazing, and I think it's gonna help a lot of people. And I really love your perspective and your language and your the way that you approach it with levity. I think is the mark of all wise people. Serious.
Yeah, exactly. We make it so serious. It also can be laughable, y'all, and enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I received that.
All right. I end each episode with a beautiful question.
Okay.
I invite you to take a deep breath and close your eyes. And I imagine your heart as a drop of water hitting the surface of a pond, and it creates a ripple 7 generations ahead of you. What essence of your droplet of your life do you want to be carried forth and remembered in those 7 generations ahead of you?
The commitment to living and building a civilization in truth, and to see us function in greater emotional maturity.
And so it is.
And so it is. That's the dedication. Yeah,
Awesome. Is there any upcoming offers or anything you want to drop and invite people to?
for sure. Not, I don't know when this will drop. But we do have the next Creative Initiate training that'll come up in January of 2026. And obviously, I do that twice a year. So anyone tuning into this can check out the link on my bio on Instagram. And my website will be out by that point too. So you could also check the website, sourceradiance.com will be up and running. So we have that program coming up, a lot of in-person events that I'll be promoting. We'll be bringing back the Revelation. We still do our activation circles, first Wednesday in Florida, first weekends in Georgia. And the last Wednesday of every month, we do a sacred ceremony online that's available for wherever anyone is. That's a half hour where we drop into collective prayer and intention and meditation and rituals around the elements. And it's really a really beautiful experience to remind us that life is the ceremony and everything about our lives is sacred. So those are some of the things that are definitely coming up in the head that I would love for whoever feels called to come join us and tap in. Yeah.
Absolutely. I highly recommend it. I hope that this episode served you. Thank you for being here, Kevin.
My
Much
honor. Thank
love.
you. Much love to you.
My pleasure.